And up next, we're thinking about the future and future generations and wondering, what if future generations faced a world with no energy, no electricity, and no fuel? Well, here to discuss that topic, on the panel discussion, A Tomorrow with No Energy, Preparing for the Worst and the Best, is a group of experts that will provide you with diverse opinions on this subject. And now the panels joining us today are people who are playing a leading role in online business companies. Without any further ado, please give a hand to welcome the co-founder and chairman of Trende Incorporated, Mr. Jeffrey Char, COO at Petronas Ventures, Mr. Ricardo Angel, Global Partnerships Manager and EEX Fund 1 at Elemental Accelerator, Mr. Shawn Moorhead, Executive Vice President at PTT's Innovation Institute, Kun Arunratt Wuttimongkolchai, and Principal Venture Capital at PTT Expresso, Kun Aroonrawee Lovanich, who is the moderator for this session. A round of applause for our panel.
Everyone, good afternoon. So today we're going to start a very eventful afternoon with this topic that touches every one of us. So basically, what if we have no energy tomorrow, and how should we prepare for that? So there are two camps of thoughts for this. One is we're going to run out of fossil fuel, and the other camp is we're going to change to something better, something more sustainable. So Ricardo, maybe I'll shoot this question to you. What do you think?
So it's a question that, are we running out of oil? That was the question?
Yes, are we running out of oil?
Yeah, so Ricardo Angel here. I run a fund called PIVA. It's the venture capital fund for Petronas. And so I've been investing in energy for the last 17 years. And if you think about the cycles for energy, and if you think about the amount of oil available for production, we had never had so much. Back in the 70s, people were talking about peak oil supply, and obviously every time we talked about peak oil supply, the barrel of oil would shut up to over $100 per barrel. Last time we did that was in around 2007, 2008, when the price of oil was around $145 or so. Now, in my view, now there is actually more oil reserves than we have ever had. And so thanks to technology, which we're going to talk about later on, we have been able to develop the technology to be able to continue to produce oil at higher volumes and at lower costs. And so, in my view, we're going to continue to do that, and just like we move away from the Stone Age, not for lack of stones, eventually we will move away from oil, not for lack of oil, but rather because of the development of new technologies that is going to be able to displace oil.
So you think we're not going to run out of fossil fuel anytime soon, but maybe I throw this question to Kun Arunratt, because PTT, Thailand, we have natural gas reserves, but a lot of us might know that we'll run out of it in several years. So how about you? Do you agree with this Ricardo's point?
I think that for the disruptive of the electricity energy, that the primary source of the energy is come from the fossil fuel and also come from the renewable energy. But right now, the cost of the renewable energy, the cost curve is sliding down, and so it will be easier to happen, because maybe if the fossil fuel, some people estimate that the peak oil will come no later than 2040. I think that if the cost of renewable is more competitive, maybe the future, the renewable will come. But in view of the PTT as the national oil company, we need to do more the energy security for Thailand. So we need to do both for the fossil fuel right now for oil and gas, and we also consider for the renewable energy in the future.
Got it.
And when she
Yes.
said peak oil, I think she meant peak oil demand as opposed to peak oil supply, right? And so there will be a point in which we're going to be using the most of oil that we had ever used, and then the demand is going to continue to decrease after that point. So very different conversation.
And then when we talk about renewable energy, I think, Shawn, you are from Elemental Accelerator. So for those of you who haven't heard yet about Elemental Accelerator, it's a global and leading energy accelerator in the world in Hawaii. So you probably see the most advanced technologies in the energy space. Do you also agree that we will have new technologies that will actually drive down the cost curve of clean energy? And then we will switch to that because it's competitive to fossil fuel.
Yes, thanks. Absolutely. I think the opportunity is in renewable energies to create the future businesses and revenue streams that will lead us into a future without fossil fuels as the major source of our energy regime. Our program receives about 800 applications from startups all over the world per year. These are technologies that range not just in energy, but also mobility, water, and agriculture, anything that you would consider within the circular economy space. Because I think the key when you're looking at transitioning out of a fossil fuel-based economy is that you have to look at the entire system. And you need the technologies that actually fit across all of those different sectors and verticals to come together to create a base of energy that actually enables renewables to be used at every source of that value chain. So in terms of seeing the technology cost go down, I would say it's been a pleasure to watch all of these technologies come to market and commercialize. Our role in the world is not to fund prototypes or R&D stage technology, but also it's to focus on the commercialization of the technologies that are already being developed and the actual real-world deployment and use case. You know, our viewpoint is that if we can provide those technologies to corporates that will actually be using them and deploying them in the real world, those corporates can actually make an impact in the economic system and make that transition more feasible.
It's actually venture capital worthy too, because when people think about clean energy, they're very scared that it's actually a very difficult space to invest, right? Okay.
Absolutely. The sales cycle in energy is incredibly long. There's a big delta between startups needing contracts and deployments and investment capital now and them proving their technology and deploying it in the real world. So it's critical that we have the folks in the world, like the corporates and the strategic partners, actually filling that gap and ensuring that they're actually taking the risk to pilot these new technologies and to take them into their portfolio of companies and create those new businesses and opportunities that allow those technologies to come to full market and be a major part of our energy system.
Yeah, got it. And one market that I think is very advanced right now is in Japan. So maybe Jeff can share with us so the Japan has deregulated the electricity market. What changes have you seen and what opportunities that have opened up for those who are interested?
So in 2016, we deregulated the retail market. So we went from 10 monopolies, geographic monopolies in Japan to about 500 retailers now, just over 500. But even before that, we had already deregulated the production side. So we have a lot of independent power producers in Japan as well, both in terms of gas and renewables. But I think we're seeing a lot of new entry into the market at all parts of the market except for transmission. And that's causing a lot of competition, which is very good, and also creating some new business opportunities.
Okay, and then so it sounds like clean energy is one of it's like one of the other industry, like similar to other industries that cost it's the most it's the most important thing. So like, but then clean energy is actually not very clean, right? We call it clean energy, but it's actually not clean. If you think about waste from battery or solar panel, what do you think? Maybe I put to Shawn.
I was hoping you'd ask me on that one, actually. I think that's the role of innovation. Yes, the chemicals and minerals that go into creating a solar panel or a battery are incredibly resource extractive, and there is currently minimal second life opportunities for a lot of those technologies. But I think that's the role of innovation, to come in, to find ways to utilize all of the second life materials in order to incorporate those and extend that life cycle 3, 4, 5, 6 times to do something what we call the circular economy here, to ensure that if we are still continuing to extract precious resources and putting them into those technologies, that we're at least using them to their maximum level of efficiency over and over and over again. So I think as the innovation curve continues to grow, and as entrepreneurs out there are solving these difficult challenges, we'll get to a point at which we're actually taking waste resources and creating new opportunities from them.
Got it. And then there's also about like lithium reserves. So when we switch to electric vehicles, and then if everyone in the world changes to electric vehicles, and then so you would need lithium, do you even have enough lithium reserves in the world for this?
So I'll make a couple of quick comments. So I agree with Shawn in terms of, innovation, in my view, it will save us, right? And so, if we think about where solar and batteries were only 8 years ago, in the last 8 years, the price of solar and batteries have dropped by 80%. And we're not done yet. We're not done yet, right? Right now, it seems like lithium is winning in terms of energy storage for vehicles and so on. Right now they're winning. That doesn't mean that that's going to be the long-term solution, right? That's point number one. Point number two is that there are potentially different sources of lithium as well, right? And so, for example, obviously Petronas and PTT, they produce a lot of oil, a lot of gas, and typically actually when you produce oil, 90% or more actually is water. You're producing, call it 2 to 8% oil when you're producing actually a lot more water than oil. When you produce this water, in many reserves, actually there is a small fraction of lithium that you can recover. And right now we're just developing the technology to be able to recover the lithium from those resources, which is a brand new source that we haven't really tapped into yet, right? And so innovation will come and will help us find a way.
Got it. And then one trend that we see right now is we're going to shift from centralized utilities to a more distributed, like everyone, like your house, you'll be able to generate power and then sell to others. It's PTT or maybe trendy. If you're working on that, can you share to the audience about like what it is? Are we going to be selling electricity from our house to other people?
Okay, I'll start. So my company is doing this in Japan right now. We're not there yet, but we're laying the groundwork for this to happen. So what we do is we sell energy just as an energy retailer to many people, people who live in an apartment or who are renting a house. And then our customers who actually own their own house with a rooftop, where the rooftop is large enough, we just sell them power, but the way we do it is a little bit different. We actually finance and install solar panels on their rooftop. And during the daytime, we sell them the power directly off the panel, and we avoid the transmission charge on that. And the excess solar power during the daytime, because we don't have storage yet, because it's still expensive, we sell under the feed-in tariff. And so we have 2 revenue streams from that, and that's how we are able to pay for the panels and the infrastructure. But in return, we actually give the panels to the customer. So there's no upfront cost for them, and they basically just get cheaper energy any time of the day or night. When we move into our third phase, which is still away, we have all these other regulatory hurdles and whatnot that we have to clear, as well as cost issues. But I think where we are going is to the day where we'll just take excess power from my house and sell it to my neighbor. And either I'm doing it because I own the panels, or somebody else is doing it who owns my panel. But we're able to sell that excess power during the day to somebody else. And if I don't need it and nobody else needs it, we can back it up onto batteries, onto cars. And then when people need it at night, then we can take it off of those batteries and cars and power the houses and the businesses. So that's coming. I think it's coming sooner than people expect, and that they realize that this is already happening and we're getting to a tipping point. As I think everyone has talked about on this panel, the cost of solar is coming down. It keeps coming down. The important thing is not that it just keeps coming down, but I think we're at the point where we're very close to a tipping point. And when that happens, all of a sudden, all the economics change, and business models that were not possible before become possible. And then the adoption rate becomes much more accelerated. And I think, if you look at exponential technologies, when you hit 1% market penetration, you're halfway there. I think we're more than halfway there already. So I believe that this is going to happen much sooner, and I'd love to hear what people at the large utilities think.
Okay, I agree with him that for the view of the innovation, so PTT also do the more research on the energy storage, because when the consumer need to use the electricity at the night time, but the solar is not come, so they need to have the energy storage to use at the all time that the consumer need. So right now, PTT developed the energy storage to solve this problem.
So one other question, one other comment. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the coming years as technology continues to improve, right? To the point that Jess just mentioned in terms of it's going to be coming, right? Depending where you're at, it's already there, right? And so where it's sunny, actually solar makes sense. I'm based in California, and in California, I'm going to talk in US dollars, right? But in California, on average in my house, I pay about 28 cents per kilowatt hour, $28 cents, right, per kilowatt hour. And if you actually install right now solar, it's about 14 cents with no incentives, right? And so in California, where there is sun, and the existing power is very expensive, solar makes already sense, right? And so, continuing with the U.S., if you are up in Chicago, in Chicago, or you're in another part of the U.S. where energy is cheap and there is not much sun, then obviously the economics there don't work, right? Not right now. Over time, I think even in those places, solar is going to work.
On that, for those who are looking at like where solar is going to be competitive to the traditional energy that we use right now, what are the drivers that they should be monitoring? Like, is it the cost of the solar PV or storage? What do you think?
I think it's efficiency, actually. I think we have a lot of the technologies that we need to actually get to the point, like Jeff mentioned, where renewable energy is just integrated into our daily lives. It's increasing the efficiencies of those technologies in conjunction with the lowering cost of those technologies that will actually be the enabling factors. One point about the future that kind of I was inspired by Jeff saying here is that I think with machine learning and advanced intelligence combined with the technology that we need, I think in the future we won't even really be aware of our energy usage or generation or distribution or sharing. I think it'll just happen in the background as part of our daily existence, in that everything that we use will either generate or share energy in some way, shape, or form. And that's the role of innovation, to come in there and actually find the ways that they actually make that possible.
I think one of the things that's been overlooked often by the utilities is that the cost of production is not the only issue. From the consumer's viewpoint, it's the cost to them. So when they buy something from the utility, it's not just the cost of production, it also includes the cost of distribution, the transmission, right? And for example, in Japan, that's about 30% of the total cost. So there's a 30% premium on power you buy from the grid because of the transmission charge. And so if you can produce that cheaper locally on the rooftop of the resident, then it's more competitive.
And so then what else do you need? That was part of the question, right? And so solar, at utility scale, right, I have seen numbers where in northern Mexico and in Abu Dhabi, in large solar farms, they're able to produce solar at under 3 cents per kilowatt hour, which is cheaper than coal, cheaper than nuclear, cheaper than anything else, right? So then the issue comes, what happens with all that power when you don't need as much, but at a time, but what happens to the power if you're going to need it a few hours later, right? And so being able to displace other resources means that you're going to need solar not only when the sun shines. And so energy storage is going to need to be part of the solution. And I think energy storage is definitely coming. And it's going to come for a number of reasons, right? So the point was made here that, during the day, if you produce too much solar, in many places, depending on the regulation, you just actually get paid the feed-in tariff. So that's great if the grid is going to be able to take it, right? So if we think about, let's say what happens in terms of if solar continues to develop in 5 to 10 years, when solars are incredibly cheap and they're actually integrated into a roof, next time that people replace their roof at home, instead of replacing an existing roof with another damn roof, you can replace it with a solar roof for just a marginally increased amount of money, right? Another 10%. So now you have a complete solar roof on your house, and on my house, and on everybody's house, where each of us are producing about 5 to 7 times more than we actually need, right? And so if we are all producing 5 to 7 times power that we
Ricardo,
need.
you have a big roof.
I live in the US, right? But if we produce 5 to 7 times more power than we need, then at some point the feed-in tariffs, in my view, are going to go away because the grid is not going to be able to take it. And so at that point, like in Europe, I'm going to have to store my own power. And if I store my own power, then if I have enough power in my batteries, I may be able to be a little more independent of the grid. Not completely, but more independent, which I think is going to drive to interesting dynamics.
So it's not just the production cost, but it's also the cost for the transmission as well. But in Thailand, it's kind of centralized by EGAD, but in Japan, it's already deregulated. Maybe Kun Arunratt can share a view on the Thai market.
For the Thai market right now is the centralized for the electricity, but government promote to use more the solar energy. So the market solar is increased, and the market maybe would like to do more to increase the efficiency of the solar.
Okay, and then as we, I think because this is a tech conference, a lot of startup founders and VC investors and also people who are interested in tech. So like if the government were to really deregulate the market, what would be some of the opportunities that open up? Say if I want to start a business in energy, what can I do? Like selling solar, doing blockchain, trading for energy? I think there are a lot of companies that in the applications to an elemental accelerator, right?
Absolutely. But on the role of government, actually, I think the government actually comes in and creates a fertile ground for innovation to be built. In a deregulated market where utilities are actually competing for business, it becomes competitive. They're looking at offering new solutions to their customers that allow those customers to access new forms of energy at a cheaper cost. And as a result, those utilities are looking to the innovation market for the technologies that they can go ahead and offer, or the technologies that create a lower operating cost for the utility themselves. In terms of the startup scene, the sales cycle, as I mentioned, is incredibly long. So that's the role of venture capitalists and the role of corporates to come in and actually fund pilot projects that lower technology risk, that attract additional venture capital, that allow startups to grow and scale to the point at which their technologies can be deployed commercially across multiple markets in new geographies. Being a startup is a difficult thing. And selling to corporates is a harder thing. And then selling to utilities is an even more difficult thing. But in a deregulated market where competition is a key part of the environment, innovation is spurred by that. And government's role is to come in and create that fertile ground.
Can I jump in? I think the discussion up until now has been about developed economies. And actually, your question is very interesting, I think, because if you look at emerging economies, in many places in emerging economies, especially outside of the cities, you've got a deregulated environment. In fact, you've got an environment where nobody is providing energy. There is no utility. There's no grid. And there's actually more than 1 billion people who live in those off-grid communities. We're seeing a lot of new business models emerge right now servicing those customers. And they're using a combination of solar with some kind of storage technology. Oftentimes it's just an old car battery, lead acid, but sometimes it's lithium. And you're seing new DC appliances being used, which are much more efficient, and this is being sold as a kit. So the amount of energy that they need to get the same value, that watching a TV program or cooling their house down, is a fraction of what it would be in the developed world. And so even our calculations on what's needed are actually wrong, because we're using the developed economies as a benchmark when we should be using their numbers as a benchmark, because they're electrifying their communities much more efficiently than we did.
So when we think about the market for this, we should not just think about what has already been electrified, but maybe rural areas, like I think in the north of Thailand or maybe Myanmar, that they have to rely on off-grid.
Yes, exactly. I mean, those places are using appliances like TVs, which are 12 watts. I mean, just for the energy geeks, that's easy to understand. For those who are not energy geeks, that's a fraction of what my TV in Japan uses. You know, my TV or my computer monitor in Japan.
You have a big TV in Japan.
Yeah, it's like 300 watts maybe, you know, but 10, 12 watts to watch TV. That's very different.
And we see corporates, PTT or Petronas set up an office in Silicon Valley, and you try to look into like the most advanced technology. Can you actually bring into Southeast Asia, to Malaysia, for example? Is it difficult, or what are the challenges?
We're working on it. And so Petronas is interesting because just about 2 months ago, Petronas came up with a new statement of vision for the company. And so their new vision for the company is to be an energy solutions provider. So no longer is obviously a leading oil and gas company. They see that there is a wave coming in terms of energy transition. They see that there are better ways to do what we have been doing for 100 years now, right? And so there is innovation in a number of different ways. There is innovation in terms of doing what they already do better. And then obviously, in addition to that, exploring new areas for growth. And so new areas for growth, for example, Petronas just about 3 months ago, they announced the acquisition. They formed a new group called New Energies. And about 2 months ago, they announced the acquisition of a solar company in Singapore called Amplas. That is a solar developer that is developing between 300 to 500 megawatts in India. And so they are going into the solar business, into the wind business, and they are working with the venture capital group in Silicon Valley to figure out what next. So we're talking about solar, we're talking about wind, we talked about energy storage. How does mobility come into play? And so we're trying to figure that out. And so, you know, this is new to Petronas. This is new to most large corporates, but they definitely are taking all the right steps to do that, right? And so we're working on processes. We're working on incentives, right? So we're just getting going. I think it looks very promising.
It's a very exciting time for PTT. You touched on mobility, great topic. PTT and EV gas stations. How are we going to be switching to that soon in Thailand? Are we going to have like an EV fleets and EV charging stations all over the country? You're looking at developing those initiatives now, so you can.
Right now, when the oil and gas will become too disruptive, so the electricity will come. So in Thailand, the government plan to increase more to use the electricity vertical, electrified vertical, maybe around 1 million, maybe in next to 2020 something. And PTT has developed the EV charger for serve the infrastructure, because some people like say that EV will come first or EV charger will come first. So now we develop the EV charger to bring the ecosystem to learn about the EV vehicle.
To add on to that from the startup perspective, I mentioned earlier that we received quite a number of applications from startups to our program from all over the world. And in the past 2 years, the amount of startups that applied with solutions that are related to EV charging has nearly tripled. This is an area that is very fertile for innovation to come in and actually provide those solutions. In your power development plan, it's a key part of the opportunity there. In Hawaii, where Elemental Accelerator is based, the government has come in and provided the necessary incentives needed to open up that market, and as a result, the entrepreneurial community is responding.
Yeah, Shawn, you mentioned at the backstage one thing that's super interesting about government policy and how it leads to increased applications of startups in this sector. Maybe can you give us an example?
Absolutely. Before I give that example, because I know which one you're talking about there, I'll mention that in Hawaii, in 2008, we enacted our first renewable energy goals, which were the most ambitious in the entire United States. We were looking to get to 100% renewable energy by 2045. And as a result, between 2006 and 2017, we went from 6% renewable energy up to 25%. So government policy definitely does stimulate innovation, but on the other side, using the example that you mentioned there, we saw an increase in the applicants last year in electric mobility. We ended up choosing an applicant called Amp Air, but before that, prior to previous application seasons, we had not seen any electric aviation innovation come into our pipeline before. So when we saw 3 companies in a few years ago enter our application pool, we wondered, why is that? What spurred this entrepreneurial community to begin innovating in this space? So we dug into that. And it was because the Federal Aviation Administration had actually come in and set the first ground rules for electric aviation test flights. And as a result, the entrepreneurial community came in and provided the innovation that was needed there to allow that market to grow and develop.
So from our take from this is the government's policy and initiatives will help spur the investments and activity in this sector, but also the technology will actually make these solutions more competitive on its own. So thank you so much for the panelists. We're not going to run out of fossil fuels soon, but the industry is going to change, the landscape is going to change, and there will be a lot of opportunities that come with it. So thank you so much. If you can please give the panelists a round of applause.